Mr. Lukey, as you well know, and I know you've talked about this, South Dakota soy is some of the best in the world, and it's used in many products. Some may be surprised to hear that the so-called square states like ours have an important role to play in fish farming. So could you kind of just tell us how your new commercial scale facility impacts the local economy in South Dakota?
No, absolutely. Thank you, Senator Thune. The square states do have an important role to play in aquaculture, because right now, for aquaculture producers that are trying to get started in the United States, the high-quality feed ingredients that they depend on, they're coming from foreign countries like Peru and Chile and even Southeast Asia. The forage fish that we've talked about are what is used in the diets of aquaculture species. And that transportation cost to get the high-quality feed ingredients into the United States for aquaculture production is cost prohibitive. And so producers are losing a significant amount of money to their bottom line. And so what we're doing with our process, and again, our process is taking soybean meal, which is a co-product of soy processing. We get soy oil and we get soybean meal. And we're taking some of the things that fish don't like to eat, the allergenic proteins, the allergenic sugars. We're taking that out of soybean meal and really making it look like, from a protein ingredient standpoint, the very feed ingredient that aquaculture producers are accustomed to feeding, the forage fish. It's a 70% protein, very highly digestible. So once we can bring that high-quality feed ingredient domestically, we can provide that from the heartland, then we should be able to grow more aquaculture facilities, because we're not depending on importing the very feed ingredients that we're dependent on to start this industry. So we feel like we've got an important role to play. We feel like soy has a very important role to play. It's a sustainable product. It has a high amino acid digestibility, and it's good for the environment. It's not discharging phosphorus into, whether it's a recirculating system or a marine environment. So we feel like we've got a very important role to play.
So what would be the economic impact on soy growing states if the United States were to embrace domestic aquaculture?
Well, it's significant, Senator Thune, because right now, we're feeding a lot of soybean meal to livestock, and as we've talked about on the panel, the feed conversion ratio of that it's not as efficient as aquaculture. So for a soybean farmer that's looking for higher value uses of its soybean meal, aquaculture is a perfect example. Today, soybean meal trades for about $300 a ton, whereas fish meal trades for between $1,500 and $1,600 per ton. So there's a significant spread between those two high-quality ingredients, and it's something that our soybean farmers can actually take advantage of in the marketplace. Now, you know as well as I do, when the farmers do well in the fields, they're spending that money locally. And so not only do family farm incomes increase because we found higher value uses of a commodity, but the rural communities around them, just like the coastal communities, when aquaculture thrives in a marine environment, those rural communities thrive because the farmers are buying new pickup trucks, they're spending money at their local grocers, and that money gets recirculated in rural economies. And so again, it's a very high impact, and it's not just the farmer that's seeing the impact. It's really the rural communities around them.
The critics of aquaculture point to the use of fish meal as feed to suggest that aquaculture is a zero-sum game. In other words, by increasing aquaculture, you're decreasing the amount of wild-caught fish available. How does using soy-based feed change the impact of aquaculture on our wild-caught fisheries?
That's one of the biggest problems that we're trying to solve, Senator Thune. And again, I think everybody on the panel can agree that nutrition is a key element. And so you want to make sure that you have high-quality ingredients that are going into aquaculture production, and you have a very efficient process. We've shown that we can use soy to replace or extend the use of fish meal in diets up to 100%. So again, not only are you not in that zero-sum game of fish in and fish out, which is what the industry uses, but the retail channel is also looking very closely about the traceability of the ingredients that are going into fish production. So, for example, the retail channel wants to know that because a fish is almost a one-for-one basis for what it's eating to what it's being produced on the shelf, they want to know where the ingredients came from. And when you can trace that back to the farm, which we can do, they get much more comfortable in the product that they're putting out into the shelf. And the other thing that we mentioned previously on the panel is the fact that when you're feeding forage fish, not only is it a zero-sum game, but there's also a lot of things in forage fish, like phosphorus, that's not being completely digested by the animal. So one of the things that we have to be very careful of as stewards of our environment, we have to be very careful about the nutrients that are fed and not digested. And so with forage fish, 50% of the phosphorus is not being used by the animal, it's being discharged into the environment. And that's harmful. So soy helps all of those things and really gives us a step up. It creates a much, much cleaner image for aquaculture.
Dr. Lucas, the regulatory barriers to offshore aquaculture in the United States seem to be a textbook example of how regulatory burdens can stifle economic innovation. Could you talk a little bit more about the barriers to a healthy aquaculture industry in the United States and any suggestions that you might have to alleviate those?
Yes. So we discussed a little bit earlier about trying to make sure we have regulatory certainty, that somebody takes ownership of kind of the permit process. I think that's something that that Congress could do through legislation, designating that person who's going to take ownership of it, work through the NEPA process, work through the environmental process. I think that's going to be critical to helping industry move forward. They want some certainty that at the end of all the money and all the hard work that they put into finding a site, that they are going to be able to get a permit, and that the permit and the lease duration is going to be long enough to not only see a return on their investment, but to also see them be able to profit from their investment. They also want to be good actors and want to have the enforcement element piece. They want to know that if they follow all the rules and regulations and the monitoring requirements, that they will have reasonable certainty that they can renew that permit that they've been working on. And I think those will be critical moving forward for industry. In addition, working with industry, the developing industry. We are developing an industry. And what it looks like on day one will be a lot different than what it looks like at year 10 or year 20 in the investments that we make. And some of those things are through research. I think Congress and legislation and appropriations that are on the scale of what we did with the agricultural industry is critical. We used the agricultural industry and we used academia and federal and state labs to do the research and then do the extension, across the nation to help farmers grow. I think the same thing can be done in aquaculture. You can use the same kind of pattern of competitive-based research and extension funding and these long-term fundings to actually get that technology out to the industry and to work with industry. I think public-private partnerships will be critical to helping the industry advance. And I think that funding along those lines for things that are the barriers in terms of being able to do marine species offshore will be critical to industry developing.